This video clip comes from our section on wireless Ethernet bridges, and it's now time to turn our attention to the issue of integrating, installing, and initially configuring that equipment. But that's a subject I'd like to cover generally, and so this video clip is also useful to anybody in any situation where you're adding a sophisticated managed piece of network equipment into an existing functioning LAN. Let's talk about managed versus unmanaged network equipment. Some equipment is profoundly dumb. It just doesn't have very much intelligence. We call that unmanaged equipment. A good example would be an Ethernet hub. It just has no brain. Most Ethernet switches are also unmanaged. They just almost mindlessly do their little job, and there's never any need to log on to them. You never point your browser at them and turn on or off functions. They're just too dumb. We call that unmanaged equipment. Other equipment is smarter and needs to be managed and configured. When you initially install it, there are a lot of decisions to make. This equipment includes things like NAT routers, file servers, wireless access points, and, the example we're showing here, a wireless Ethernet bridge. Managed equipment generally uses the Internet protocol, and when it's manufactured, the designers always implement inside it an Internet protocol or IP address. They call it the default IP address that's ready to be used right out of the box before you make any changes. The first time you ever try to communicate with one of these new managed boxes, you are forced to use that default IP address. You'll connect to the box with a local computer using an Ethernet hardwired connection. You'll fire up a browser because these managed boxes also always include inside them a little tiny web server that's oriented toward communicating with you to configure these devices. But there can be some problems here. That default IP address might already be in use on your local area network. It's commonplace for these manufacturers to keep using the same default IP addresses for all their various kinds of equipment, so conflicts abound. Also, before you can talk with that device, your laptop computer or your locally connected computer has to be speaking on the same IP subnet that device uses by default. And different manufacturers tend to use different subnets, and you, in your home, will have already chosen some subnet that's in use. If they're not the same, your computer won't be able to speak to that default IP address until you make some changes. So you'll have to find out what is that default IP address for the new device, and you'll have to change your computer to that same subnet if necessary before you can talk. Actually, you'll need to know several items of information. You'll need to know the device's default IP address, also the default administrative username and password. Usually, you can get this information from printed little tags on the bottom or hidden someplace on the surfaces of the device. Once you have that information, you can figure out whether your personal computer is already on the proper subnet. And if not, you can configure your personal computer with a static IP address from the appropriate subnet. You can learn how to do that from other movies within the Networking Fundamentals section here at AskMisterWizard.com. Take a look here. The best source of this information is shown by going to www.askmisterwizard.com, as you see here. From the main page, go to the Networking Fundamentals section, and there's that index that you saw on the left. Scroll down to the area on IP addresses and look at these movies. The one entitled Configuring Your Internet Connection Part 2, Static IP Configuration, is perfect for this. It'll tell you exactly what to do if you're using a Windows-type PC. You'll then fire up your browser, and you'll configure your browser to go to that IP address, as long as you're on the same subnet, as shown here. Once that's done, you'll have to provide the administrative username and the password that were pre-configured into the device in advance by default. You really have no choice in this matter. This is the way you must begin to talk to that device. Because you may have conflicts with your existing IP addresses or your existing subnet, it's important that you be connected only to that new device. Don't connect the device into your main LAN yet. Just hook the PC directly to the device all by itself, as shown here. By now it should be obvious, and you should know already, how to use your browser to talk to that device and configure the various menu options that are offered. Obviously there are some details that we'll cover for each individual type of device, but in general you're going to just browse around from the things that are offered. If you don't know how to do that, you can get the information you need again from AskMisterWizard.com in our Networking Fundamentals section. As you see here, you're going to go in and find the movie entitled Managing Your Network Equipment with Your Web Browser. It's perfect for this, and it'll tell you all of the general principles. So with your directly wired computer and your browser talking to that new device on its default IP address from within the same IP subnet, you'll see lots of menu options offered for everything that will be necessary to manage and control and configure that device, whatever it may be. Sometimes they'll be obvious, sometimes you may need further details, but if you keep in mind the various principles we've talked about and look at the details available from other clips here at AskMisterWizard.com, you can configure any managed device using these methods. There are some things you'll almost always want to do. For example, you'll almost always want to change the subnet of the device to the subnet that you're actually using on your LAN, and you'll almost always want to change its IP address, its default management IP address. It's something that doesn't conflict with your LAN. As soon as you make those changes, you're going to lose that session. Your browser will disconnect. You'll have to reconnect using that newly changed address. In this case, we're talking about a wireless Ethernet bridge, and further details on that subject are available in the next clip.